So we should have been doing a little bit of eyewitness misidentification information yesterday. So just learning how our memories are usually not as reliable as we tend to think they are. We're going to continue doing that with just a little bit of notes today. Like literally, it's just a couple slides. Just kind of just showing you these graphs that just kind of put it very clearly with the information provided that eyewitness misidentification, so people misidentifying their suspect, happens too much. And being that we now know that, like it's a pretty recent discovery that our memories don't work as good as we thought they did. For a long time, people thought that if you had an eyewitness testimony, a person saw it and could pick out their victim in pick up their suspect in a lineup, they thought that that was like the best evidence you could possibly have. They're like, oh my gosh, they remember them. That's definitely them. And a lot of times there's been many people, they have been convicted of crimes where the only thing they had against that person was eyewitness testimony. And people just thought that highly of eyewitness testimony. I mean, imagine a woman is on is on trial. And she's talking to the court and she's pleading, she's crying about her terrible assault. And she's pointing at the man who's on trial and she's saying, he is the man that did it to me. I remember it exactly. Now, when the jury hears that, they feel for her. They want her to have justice. They believe that her memory is correct because that's just how we kind of feel about all of our memories. We think that our memories are accurate when in fact, as we should have been learning yesterday, is that our memory doesn't record things the way we think it does. It actually can be re-recorded. You can change memories in your head by just rethinking about them, think about them in a different way. You can add stuff into your memories. We can falsely plant memories. They've done that in a lot of psychological studies. And it's easy to do. When you're in a fight or flight situation, so we're in these assault cases, so in these terrible traumatic events in people's lives, when you're in fight or flight, your body shuts down everything in your body that isn't important right then because they're just trying to get away. So one of those things that gets shut down is the way we log memories. Your body isn't trying to log memories. It's not even focusing on it at all because its only goal is to get away. So in knowing that, there's just been a lot of evidence that came out in the past 20 or so years that even if you saw your suspect, you saw your attacker, you saw them for a long period of time, you saw them in bright light, it doesn't mean you will actually remember what they look like later because our brain just does not log information the way we think it does into long term. So let's look at this graph. It says eyewitness misidentification is the single greatest cause of wrongful convictions nationwide. So this just has been proven, okay? It plays a role in nearly 75% of the convictions that are overturned through DNA testing. So something we're going to talk about today is the Innocence Project. There's other projects like it, but it's the biggest project out there where they are overturning convictions. So they're getting people out of prison, getting people off death row who were convicted and proving that they were not actually guilty through DNA. So back in our previous notes, we should have learned that we were not able to do DNA testing until 1990. Okay, so 1990 was not very long ago. It was only 30 years ago. And being that we couldn't do it at all until 1990, that means it wasn't standard practice for another 10 to 15 years in many places across our country. So, I mean, literally, DNA is a very new science. Being that that is true, many people who were convicted before 2000 may have had DNA that could have been tested in their trial, but it wasn't tested because they didn't think of it as an option or didn't even know it was an option. It was before 1990. So now these people who were innocent have been pleading with their lawyers, pleading with their families to keep paying, to keep trying to get their convictions overturned. And finally, they were allowed, they test the DNA, and they find out that they were, in fact, innocent. So when we're looking at this graph, this is a graph of people who have been exonerated. Exonerated means released from prison. So people we have proved were actually falsely imprisoned. 75% of those cases had eyewitness testimony being a big factor in their case, meaning that their eyewitness was there and misidentified them. So they picked them in a lineup, put them either in an actual lineup of people actually in front of you standing, or they picked them in a photo lineup. Either way, they picked the wrong person. Now, sometimes it could have been a person lying. Of course, Of course, that could happen. But a lot of times when we look at those cases, the victim was sure. The victim believed that that was their suspect. It's what they had in their memory, and they were wrong. Forensic science is our next one. That's sad. 50% of the cases that have been exonerated so far had an issue with forensic science as well. So like faulty hair analysis, bite mark analysis is pretty is usually not very good evidence because it's very hard to get a very good bite print. I mean, imagine like they're moving. You're usually not going to find a very good like imprint, so that's pretty hard to match. Hair and fibers are they don't look different enough under a microscope to be your main point in a case. So things like that, and the fact like even blood and DNA testing, because it was so new, it could have been done wrong. So things like that, this forensic science was literally done wrong, and they'll go back and they'll recheck it. They'll have someone else look at the evidence and decide that whoever did it in the first place didn't do a very good job. So that is sad. Hopefully that is stopping happening. Hopefully we are getting better at this, and more people are getting trained. But again, a lot of cases that had already happened are having to be fixed, or having to be relooked at, and people being exonerated from prison. And then we have about 20% having false confessions. Again, that should be going way down as well, because we used to have practices where you could keep a suspect in a room and, drill them and drill them and drill them until they might just be so tired or hungry or, just want to get out of the room that they might just confess. And that's terrible. So they have a lot more standard practices now where they do have to give suspect breaks. They do have to give them food. They do have to let them rest in between. They do have to be videotaped and recorded. So you can't be having any kind of police brutality anymore with people that you're, what do you call it when you're talking to a suspect? I'm going drawing a blank. But that used to happen more. Hopefully that shouldn't be happening as much where people are falsely confessing. And lastly, the smallest amount says a little under 20% being informants. So it's just like people informing you, saying that they had a tip, they have a tip on who did it, and it ends up being false, which I don't really know how you could stop that happening. Just people do the best you can. Don't turn in someone that you know didn't do it. Now, this next chart just breaks it down in a little bit different way. So the different colors are mistaken witness ID. So meaning the witness, so the eyewitness mistakes who they were. So again, that's eyewitness mistake. Perjury or false accusation, so someone lying and falsely accusing, is in red. False confession is yellow. False or misleading forensic science is in green, so like forensic science being wrong, them looking at the information wrong or doing it wrong. Or official misconduct, so that is actually it's like misconduct on the cop's side. So this is from 2019. If we're looking, and it just breaks it down by type of case. So I want to focus on sexual assault and homicide. So for sexual assault and homicide, blue is the highest for sexual assault, and that is mistaken witness ID. So that's false eyewitness testimony. So the eyewitness who was sexually assaulted in her case or in his case picks a person in a lineup or in a paper lineup or photo lineup and picks the wrong person. This is what you're going to see in a lot of cases. So I'm going to actually have y'all do a short research project on the Innocence Project, either into today or tomorrow. I don't remember which day. And you'll find that a lot of the cases where someone was falsely imprisoned was a sexual assault case. And a lot of times in those cases, it's very likely that you will have eyewitness testimony being the issue. Because like I said, a lot of us think our memories work really well when you're in that fight or flight situation, which you would be in if you were in a sexual assault situation. You would be in fight or flight. Your brain is not logging memories the way it normally would. And a lot of times we do not actually remember what our perpetrator looks like unless you knew them already. So you like already knew who they were. So that has become an issue. The red, the next highest, is perjury or false accusation. Sadly, people are being falsely accused. That should not happen. We should not falsely accuse people of that crime. Okay, but that is another one that is fairly high. And then purple is official misconduct. So that can be so many different things. So I don't know how to go into much detail on that, because it just means that they did something wrong with the evidence, something wrong on the police officer side, the police department, and that could be so many different things that I don't really know how to specify it. Green is pretty small, so bad forensic evidence doesn't happen that much. Like if they do have, you know, a semen sample, so for sexual assault, and they match it through DNA, that's generally going to be right. The only way to do that wrong is like pre-DNA. You could get a blood type from that, so then maybe the blood type matches our suspect, but it still isn't him because it was just blood type. Now for homicide, I want you to notice the change. Okay, so in homicides, the eyewitness testimony does go down quite a bit. It's still kind of high, but it's just as high as false confessions almost, and just as high as bad forensic science almost. So when someone sees someone get murdered, again, if they're just an eyewitness to a murder, that's a homicide. You may not be in a fight or flight syndrome because you are not being murdered. So then you might be able to remember the information better about who you saw murder someone, because maybe you are less afraid. Maybe you just walked in. Maybe you actually knew the person. Maybe in the beginning you were actually fine with it, but then decided to turn them in. So they might just be less afraid, and that could be why their memories are less of an issue there. The highest ones, though, is perjury or false accusations for homicide. So people saying someone else did it so they don't go away for murder. And then again, the official misconduct. Murder is a really, that's our biggest crime. That's it. That's the biggest crime. So police officers and police departments, that is going to be the crimes they want to solve most. So where are we going to see the biggest official misconduct because they want to get the crime solved? They want to have it down in the books that it's solved? In homicide, because that is the one they want to solve the most. That's not good. I think we could all agree that more training needs to be in place to make sure that those things do not occur. And the stuff that we're going to talk about has been very recently implemented about how we can make these things happen less, how we can have people falsely imprisoned a lot less. So just kind of focusing on those two, because you're going to see those two crimes a lot in your Innocence Project, homicide and sexual assault. All right. So while eyewitness testimony can be persuasive evidence before a judge or a jury, 30 years of strong social science research has proven that eyewitness identification is often unreliable. So it's repeating what I'm saying. People used to think so highly of eyewitness testimony. It was like the best evidence you could have. And now we have realized over the last 30 years that through several experiments, our memories are just not as good as what we say they are. They're not. They do not work the way we think they do. We can rewrite memories in our head. We can be shown images of people in a lineup. So like you see this lineup here. If you are shown this lineup of 5 men and then they call you back in to do another lineup, but they repeat some of these men, but only repeat some of them, that's actually making your brain remember them. And then you might remember them from the lineup, but think you remember them from the crime scene. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, he looks familiar. Well, yes, he looks familiar, because you just saw him in a lineup last week, not because he was in your actual crime. So I know we don't like to believe that our memories work like that, but they do. We just do not remember the way we think that we do. And it's happened time and time again that eyewitness testimony has been proven to be inaccurate. All right, so this should be our last slide. Yes. So the Innocence Project was created in 1992. The goal was to re-examine post-conviction cases. So they've already been convicted, they're already in prison. And when evaluating, when they're evaluating these eyewitness testimonies, the investigator must discriminate between fact and opinion. So did this really happen? Did they really see that? Or could have been caused in so many different ways, but the eyewitness testimony just wasn't correct. And other things too, like bad forensic science, falsely confessing, those things can be involved as well. But they do see it happen a lot, that there was faulty eyewitness testimony. And usually how they're getting these people out is by testing DNA. Because if you see the time frame here, it was created in 1992. Our first case of DNA was solved in 1990. So it was basically right after the fact we realized we could start testing DNA. This project was started to open up cases that had already been done. They're already convicted. They're sitting in prison. They're sitting on death row. We open up their case again. We retest their DNA. And we find out that they are supposed to be there. So that's what that project is. You're going to learn a little bit more about that when you get to research some of the people that has happened to. later, either today or tomorrow.